Hi, everyone. On behalf of Syngenta, my name is Marshall Gaster, and thank you for joining the tick webinar, Fight the Bite with an Effective IPM Strategy. And I'll be moderating the webinar today. In a few minutes, I'll be turning over to our guest speaker, but first I would like to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and all attendees' mics are muted. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function within the Zoom application. Also, given the length of the webinar, which is going to be about 30 minutes, we're going to hold all the questions to the end, and then I will work through and moderate questions towards the end. If we don't have time to answer all questions, we'll follow up with attendees or the larger population with an email. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. So Dr. Nikki Gallagher joined Syngenta back in 2012 and currently serves as a technical services manager for the Midwest and Northeast version of professional pest management. With over 19 years of experience, Dr. Gallagher has a strong background in urban entomology. Her former positions include a staff research associate position in the entomological department at the Ohio State University and a development and technical representative for DuPont Professional Pest Management. Dr. Gallagher maintains responsibilities for all phases of field trials and technical support within her region and coordinates multiple research projects with university researchers and cooperators. She currently holds a BS from the College of Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati, Ohio, as well as a MS and PhD with the Ohio State University. So, Nikki, thank you for joining us today, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Marshall, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm going to see if I can get my computer to wake up here and start my video, try and have a little bit of interaction here. So hopefully folks can see me, but definitely not required to watch me while we're going through this presentation. So again, yeah, thank you for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate that. And I'm going to try my best to stay close to that 30-minute mark on the presentation. So we're going to just jump right in here. Get these slides to progress here. Okay, great. So we're going to try and cover these main points here today. We're going to talk a little bit about tick-borne diseases. We'll cover, what exactly is a tick and the importance of understanding our risk, and we'll touch on the key components of an integrated pest management program for ticks. And we will also discuss the Syngenta Secure Choice Tick Assurance Program that we have. So the chart that you're seeing up here, I think is really relevant and helpful when we think about the importance of tick control. So mosquitoes and ticks are vectors for a number of different pathogens, and they can transmit vector-borne diseases. So mosquitoes and ticks are blood-feeding arthropods, and when they take that blood meal, and that could be us as the source of that blood meal, they could be transmitting a pathogen when that happens. Mosquitoes are certainly important, and there are a number of species and different pathogens that they're capable of transmitting. But when you compare that to ticks, to me, it's pretty astounding at the number of cases that ticks are causing compared to mosquito-borne diseases. So this data is from 2014, so prior to the Zika outbreak. So this is roughly 50,000 vector-borne disease cases reported in 2014. About 6% were from mosquitoes. The rest were from ticks. And approximately 30,000 of those alone were from Lyme disease. And the CDC states that it's likely that Lyme disease cases and other tick-borne disease cases are underreported. So that 30,000 cases of Lyme every year is probably close to something like 300,000 cases. And just to give you a slight glimpse of the distribution of tick-borne diseases across the U.S. So this is just 4 diseases that ticks can transmit. There are a variety more of diseases, and the range of these diseases are increasing, as well as the range of ticks are increasing across the United States. So these are just four of the most commonly encountered, and you can see there are certain ranges where you find them more predominantly. But if you are a person who just really despises ticks, I'm here to tell you, and I'm very sorry to tell you, that you can try and run and hide, but in every state, you're at risk of tick-borne diseases. And the ranges that you're seeing here, really do correlate with the range and distribution of certain tick species. So not every tick is capable of transmitting disease or transmitting the same diseases. And just to show you an example of the expansion of tick-borne diseases, let's look a little bit more closely, just specifically at Lyme disease. And that is, again, it's the tick-borne disease that we see the most common. The cases are increasing across the country. And this is a great study that was published through CDC researchers just a couple of years ago. The US map on the left-hand side of the screen from 1996 is showing the distribution of the two ticks that can vector Lyme disease. So Ixodes pacificus is the western black-legged tick, and that's what you find in the Pacific coast, so in places like California. And Ixodes scapularis, which is the black-legged tick. Some people might be more familiar with that being called the deer tick, and that is what we find on the eastern portion of the United States. Both capable of transmitting Lyme disease. So in 1996, you can see the range there. The green filled in counties means it's been reported. If the county is blue, that means that population of ticks is established, that they collected more than 6 ticks in different stages. Now, if we move to the more recently collected data on the right side of the screen, 2015, you can see how significant the distribution expansion now is of that tick. I live in central Ohio, and you can see that the Ohio River Valley area is just getting sandwiched in by ticks moving in from the northeast, and then ticks moving in from the Wisconsin, Minnesota area are moving down south. So we're just sort of getting sandwiched in as that tick is expanding its range. And as the tick is expanding its range, the number of cases of Lyme and other pathogens that the tick can transmit are increasing too. So that's roughly about a 50% increase in the number of counties with these ticks. And it's not just pathogens that we're seeing happening with ticks. The newest sensation or the newest risk that we're seeing happening is actually an allergen issue. So the Lone Star tick, which we find mostly in the southeastern states, but again, another tick that is expanding its range. It's moving into northern states now as well. This has a link to causing a allergy response to red meat. So this tick, the Lone Star tick, is brought into areas, typically brought in by deer, but other animals too. In the southeast, you often hear this tick called the turkey tick because it'll feed on turkeys and other birds, and that can help move the tick around. People can be bit by this tick. You can then build up an antibody response to alpha-gal. Alpha-gal is what the tick transmits during that blood meal. Alpha-gal is just a sugar. It's a type of carbohydrate. Primates, humans and other primates, do not have alpha-gal, but other animals, red meat-based animals do. So birds and fish don't have alpha-gal. So after that tick bite, you build up antibodies to alpha-gal, and then if you ingest red meat that would have alpha-gal, then some people can actually have that allergic response, and it might just be an itchy rash, but it can also be very severe and life-threatening that some people can go and have a full anaphylactic response to that. So what makes a tick? Just very quickly, ticks are blood-sucking ectoparasites. Some of them have a pretty wide host choice that they're not super specific, but some tick species are extremely host specific and only feed on one type of host. They're very slow feeding, so not like mosquitoes where mosquitoes come in and feed for just a few minutes. Ticks are slow feeding, feeding for a number of days, up to a week or more. In the United States, we only have about 80 species or so, and about 12 or so of those can actively bite people and have the risk of transmitting pathogens. So ticks are not spiders. They're actually more closely related to spiders and mites. They all belong into the arachnid order. They don't have that segmented body that we see in insects. They're basically just an abdomen and then not even a true head. It's more like just a set of mouth parts where you would see the head. They have a very leathery body, and that leathery body actually works in their favor, that when they take that blood meal, and the female, when she fills with eggs, it allows it to expand. The adults and nymphs have 8 legs, just like spiders, but the larvae, with that first stage that comes out of the egg, they only have 6 legs. And the males and females can be quite distinct in their appearance. And just to show you, we're going to be focusing on hard ticks for our presentation today. And that name hard tick comes from the scutum that you see here on our black-legged ticks. So it's like a hard shield. And then underneath is the leathery, soft part of the tick. And on that shield, you can sometimes see a marking on their ornamentation that helps with identification. There are other characteristics that we can look at as well. The female tick only has a short scutum. On the male, it'll actually extend all the way down the body, because the male doesn't have to expand as much as a female, because males don't really feed a whole lot. And of course, it's the females that are going to be generating the eggs. Just to give you a quick example of some of the common hard ticks that we have across the U.S. Again, this is not showing all of the ones that we could possibly encounter. Different parts of the country, we're going to be at risk from different ticks as well as different pathogens. If you are interested in knowing what the risk is in your specific area, a great resource is going to be the CDC, or look at your local or state health department websites, and they typically have great information in the ticks as well as mosquitoes and the diseases that they are transmitting in your particular area. So most of these ticks that you see here are going to be outdoors, and that we can target and control them from the outside. The one that would be different here would be the brown dog tick. It's widely distributed. Their habitat really is where we find dogs. We can find this tick, and they can live readily indoors, and their preference is to feed on dogs, but they can bite humans. And more recently, they've actually been found to be a vector for Rocky Mountain spotted fever in the southwestern U.S., particularly areas like Arizona and New Mexico. So that's one to be aware of if you're in that part of the country. Now, sort of for simplicity's sake, I just want to point out these 3 ticks. There are some of the most common ticks in the U.S., and in terms of the pathogens that they can transmit, these are the most commonly encountered. The American dog tick has a very broad distribution, especially across the eastern part of the U.S. We also find it in the Pacific West in California. It can transmit Rocky Mountain spotted fever as well as tularemia. The Lone Star tick causes the most bites in the southeast. And you can see here with the Lone Star tick, these are all the adult females that we're looking at in these images. The Lone Star tick has that characteristic sort of silvery white dot on the scutum there. And she can transmit a number of pathogens such as ehrlichiosis and tularemia. And then our black-legged tick, which is also known as the deer tick, and we're just showing the species here on the eastern portion of the U.S., and found all the way from north to south, all the way down to Florida, and we have a significant pocket in the upper Midwest as well. And we typically talk about Lyme disease with this tick, but this tick, just like others, can actually have what we call co-infections. So you could have a tick that is infected with Lyme disease as well as babesiosis or anaplasmosis. And if that tick bites you, it could potentially transmit more than one pathogen. I'm not necessarily showing every potential pathogen that these ticks could transmit. These are just some common examples. But you can see some of them are bacteria-based and some of them are virus-based. So there is a lot of diversity when it comes to these pathogens. And just a little bit of seasonality. So, very bluntly, when we get into the warm season, the warm months means tick season. And this is just an example of the peak season for some of these ticks. Now, this might shift a little bit as we move from state to state. If we move down south, we might see some of these ticks a little bit earlier, and their season might go on a little bit longer. So this is a person's finger here in the background, and also gives you a good idea of the size of these ticks. So at the very tip of the finger, we have the adult female and adult male of the Lone Star tick. We typically see peak activity, especially in the Midwest, April through September. But we can have any stage of this tick being active during the warm months. Mid-April through mid-July is typically active season for the American dog tick. And with the American dog tick, it's really just the adults that we find biting humans. They do have a preference for feeding on dogs, and they will readily feed on us too. We just don't typically see larvae and nymphs going after humans. It's really just the adult stage. But what's really important here, I want to point out, is the black-legged tick. You can find this tick any month of the year as long as it's not freezing outside. In the wintertime, the adult stage can still be active and can still feed on you and potentially transmit a pathogen. So every month of the year, there's the potential to encounter this tick, and depending on the time of the year, the stage that we encounter will be different. But again, it's important to be tick smart and be tick aware every month of the year when it comes to this tick. And we don't think about that in the wintertime, especially in the Midwest and the Northeast, if we're in a tick-prone area or going out on a hike, that we could come home with one of these ticks. And the pressure of other ticks continues. I just wanted to share this slide with you because over the past few years, we've had a new tick found in the United States. The Asian longhorn tick, it's not native to the United States, it's from Asia. It was found a couple of years ago, first in New Jersey, and the local health departments, the USDA, have been out conducting surveillance to find out where this tick really is. And as of April 15th, 2020, the data that they're showing on their website, there's 12 states where they've now confirmed the presence of this tick. And the different colored counties here, the different colors just represents the different type of method that they use to diagnose or confirm that it truly is the Asian longhorn tick. Could be a problematic tick because it doesn't require a male to be successful. It can basically just clone itself. A female can produce eggs without a male, so populations can build up pretty quickly, pretty largely, found on a wide variety of animals, from livestock. If you go to the USDA website, you can see that they're finding them on elk, raccoons, humans as well have been bitten by this tick as well. Thankfully, no diseases transmitted in the US so far, but in other parts of the world, it can transmit significant pathogens that can be pretty devastating, especially for livestock. So the hard ticks that we're talking about have a 3-host tick life cycle, fairly straightforward, and I love the efficiency of the ticks that they only require 3 blood meals to get through life. The larvae will hatch from the egg stage. larvae typically go after a small mammal, small bird, again, could be a human. They'll take a blood meal, they'll drop off, molt into the nymphal stage. The nymphs then will also host seek, typically taking a meal from another small to medium mammal, will then finish their blood meal, drop off, and molt into the adult stage. And then the adult will also take a blood meal and then use that to help develop the eggs. So a blood meal is needed to molt into the next stage, to complete development, and then as well as to develop eggs as they're an adult. So we are at risk every time the tick is seeking a blood meal. And if we're talking about the black-legged tick here, as the larvae or the nymphs emerge, this is also a critical part where they can pick up a pathogen from their reservoir. So with black-legged ticks, larvae are not infected when they first come out. But if they take a blood meal from a mouse, which is the reservoir for Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the species name for Lyme disease, those ticks can then become infected. And when they drop off, become nymphs, those nymphs are now potentially infected. And if they take their next blood meal from a human, they can then transmit that pathogen to us. We're just considered a dead-end host. We don't keep the cycle of the disease going between the ticks and the mice, but we can be infected and unfortunately become sick. Ticks are not like fleas. They don't jump. They're not like mosquitoes. They can't fly. So when they are looking for a blood meal, what they do is they quest. They typically climb up some tall vegetation like a blade of grass, and they will wave their legs around. They have special receptors on there to detect CO2, heat. They can also detect movement. And then as an animal walks by, they will latch on with their legs and then walk around until they can find a piece of skin to settle in and insert their mouth parts to start taking their blood meal. And just to, you can see some examples of habitats here. We've got a walkway through a wooded area. So those ticks would be hanging out on the edge of that walkway, just waiting for somebody to walk by. And here you can see Dr. Kirby Stafford, who is a tick researcher in Connecticut, doing a tick drag. So he is dragging a piece of cloth along this transition zone. So ticks are in the shady, moist, wooded, grassy areas, but will also come out into this edge area looking for that blood meal. So this is a great area to drag a piece of cloth, and that gives us an idea of the tick activity in that area. You might have had this experience in this particular image. Here we can see the larval stage of the Lone Star tick has gotten all over a person's hand. And we also call these seed ticks. And they can come out in huge numbers. So if a female has laid her egg mass in an area and you're unfortunate to come along, you might end up with a couple of hundred ticks on you at the same time. Just a good example, just to show you the importance of one of the first steps of IPM, which is personal protection. And if you find a bunch of ticks on you at once, don't panic. Just using something sticky like duct tape or even a lint roller can be great at removing a bunch of ticks at once. And with those larval ticks, they don't typically, they're not super successful in getting through our skin very quickly, so you have a good window to remove them. Now, hopefully you're yelling at me on this screen right now and saying, well, I don't want the ticks on me in the first place, and that's great. You want to use some repellent, some EPA-approved repellent like DEET, typically 30 to 60% is great for tick repellency. And even better, there are products, make sure that they are appropriately labeled for putting onto your clothes. There are permethrin-based products for spraying on your clothes. Sometimes there are clothes that are already impregnated with this. Just make sure it's appropriately labeled for that use, and it doesn't just repel ticks, it will actually kill them as they try to crawl onto your clothes. So when the tick attaches to you, it's actually going to use its mouth parts. It's going to slide its mouth parts back and forth, and you can see in this image they kind of look like a fish hook. It's going to slide its mouth parts in there. It's going to also eject some cement so it doesn't fall off. And then it's going to find some blood vessels, slash that open, and then just start sucking up the blood. But unfortunately, it's also going to be spitting into your bloodstream as well. It's going to spit anticoagulants to keep the blood flowing, but as it's spitting and slurping and spitting and slurping, there's the risk that a pathogen can then move into your bloodstream as well. But the CDC, if you follow their guidelines, you'll see that, one, it's important to move that tick safely. Use some fine forceps, get those forceps as close to the skin as possible. Pull up the tick, straight up. You don't have to twist or anything like that. And remove that tick as quickly as possible. Make sure you do a thorough tick check if you've been in a tick area. The longer a tick is attached, your chance of disease transmission goes up. So if you remove a tick within 24 hours, your risk of transmission is basically close to zero. But once it's on you for 36 hours or more, as you can see, the probability of transmission gets higher and higher. So that personal protection and prompt tick removal is really important. And quickly, just want to show you with the black-legged tick, there is seasonality to the different stages. And this is data that was kindly shared from the Ohio Department of Health. This was based on submissions of ticks that are sent in for identification, but it really shows the seasonality of the different stages. Again, potential to see a stage during any period of the year, but we are right now in the nymphal season, the nymph stage season. That is going to be peaking here soon, and that is of concern when it comes to transmission of diseases such as Lyme disease. Our risk right now is going up. The larval stage comes out in late summer, early fall. Again, the larvae aren't infected until they take their first blood meal and then molt into nymphs. The adults potentially could have twice the infection rate as nymphs because they've had 2 blood meals when they come to bite you. And we see their activity really peaks in the fall. But again, they will overwinter, and we might see them in January, February, March as well, depending on how severe the winter is. But nymphs is when we're most prone to being bit by this tick. That's because we're out and about. It's nice outside. And if you look at the cases of Lyme disease by month, it really matches the activity time of nymphs. So once we get into June, July, the number of cases really peak, and that's due to bites from the nymphal stage. And it's so dangerous as a vector of Lyme disease is because it's active when we're active. It only has a brief feeding time, so a nymph only has to feed for about 3 days, and it's a really small size, so it can be really hard to find on your body. And as you can see from the image here, so if you look at letter number D, that is the nymph of a black-legged tick. It's really tiny. It's about the size of a poppy seed. So that can be really hard to find. So make sure you're doing a really good thorough check when you're in the shower. So let's talk a little bit about management of these ticks. So a good approach is to have multiple strategies for tick control. Again, that personal protection is very important. Landscape management is really key. Ticks like it when it's humid. They like moisture, they like shade. So if you can modify the environment to that, it's going to reduce their survival. It won't get rid of all the ticks, but it will reduce their survival. Management of host abundance as well. So these ticks really like to feed on small mammals like mice. Deer are really key for their success as well, especially for the adult stage. So things like fencing or host reduction or removal can really be ideal, as well as pesticides. And that can be through host-targeted pesticides. So there are actually treatments out there today that target the mice, chipmunks, and deer. So any ticks on them will then die. And then area-wide applications, or I should say barrier applications of pesticides for the ticks themselves. So spraying insecticides to reduce the ticks at a local level. So just a quick little image here to show you vegetation management. It's not always possible to do this, but you can see we've gone from a heavily wooded area on the edge of someone's property, and it's been nice and heavily mulched to create airflow and reduce the density of those plantings. Now, when it comes to the insecticide application for ticks, you don't have to spray the entire property. We're really creating a tick zone or going after tick hotspots as well. Typically talking about the perimeter of the property, especially if this is a property that is up against a wooded area, and treating vegetation about 3 feet and below. So this is a bird's eye view of somebody's property here. You can see the house, and along the edge here is where we have the tick zone. And so we might be creating a mulch layer to reduce moisture, and then we're going to apply our insecticide a couple of feet into this wooded area and just a little bit out into the transition zone and a little bit out into the lawn. The ticks aren't going to come out too terribly far into a maintained yard. So again, we don't have to treat everything. And then again, do a thorough inspection, and if there are some hot spots close to the structure or on the journey to the mailbox, those might be areas that we might be able to target as well. I just want to share a little bit of data that we have when we did a study up in Connecticut with the Connecticut Agricultural Experimental Station. And this was looking at Demantias for tick control. And you might be familiar with Demantias. It's a micro-capped pyrethroid containing the active ingredient lambda-cyhalothrin. It is labeled for ticks and many other pests. And having that microcap, it's really helpful to give it that extended residual performance. So this particular study was in real world structures on properties that had tick activity. And we actually looked at Demantias as well as applications of Demantias tank mixed with Archer insect growth regulator, which contains pyriproxyfen. So this work was done by Dr. Kirby Stafford and Dr. Scott Williams from the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, primarily targeting the deer tick or the black-legged tick. And what was unique about this study is we used backpack mist blowers to do the application. We know power sprays actually do an excellent job for tick control. We wanted to see if we went out with a backpack mist blower, perhaps you were doing a mosquito job at the same time, which is an ideal piece of equipment to do for mosquitoes. Could we do an effective job for ticks at the same time? And we were looking to see if this one treatment would last at least 90 days. So we had 8 houses that had the combination of Demand and Archer, and 7 properties that had Demantias alone. And we used the high rate of Demantias. And here you can see Dr. Williams going out using the backpack mist blower, treating deep into the vegetation, and he's going to come out into the transition zone as well. If you are using this equipment, just a quick note just to say we highly recommend using a service container to pre-mix and then putting it into your mixer, into your backpack mix blower, and that just makes sure you have a really nice thorough mix of your product. Just to show you, on average, we went out about 1.3 gallons per 1,000 square feet at these sites, and each site was getting in the range of 6 to 7 gallons total. And just a nice visual to show you how well the backpack mist blowers do. So these are water sensitive cards. They go from yellow to blue when water hits them. So you can see we're getting really good coverage, but what I would say is it's really important to stand close to that vegetation. Don't rely on getting good coverage standing 20 feet away from the vegetation. So have good high settings on your backpack mist blower and stand as close as possible. And what we found is we got excellent control, whether we were using Demantias as a standalone or in combination with the insect growth regulator. Once the treatment went out, we got 0 ticks showing up in the control group, which is in the gray line. We did see ticks popping up all throughout that 90-day period. but 0 ticks showing up when we use demand as well as demand and Archer. Now, from this one particular study, we can't say that the addition of Archer gave us a great advantage for this particular tick in this particular study, but there is other research out there showing that IGRs can be effective for ticks. But what this does show us is there was no negative effect. And if we were going out doing a mosquito treatment as well as that tick treatment, it would be effective for both of those target pests. So if you're interested in knowing more, anything about ticks or about our Secure Choice Tick program, all of that information is on our website, which you can see here at syngentapmp.com/tick. This is just one application of Demand CS at the high rate. Is going to get you 90 days of control. If you don't get that control, the assurance program is that we will actually supply the Demand CS required to do that retreatment. And again, I apologize for going over a little over 30 minutes here, but at this point, if there's any follow-up questions, we can go over those now, or you can get my contact information, and we can gladly do that over email, over the phone, and I will gladly follow up that way as well. Be glad to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nikki. So as a reminder, we'll take some questions now, if you don't mind submitting them through the Q&A function within Zoom. While we're waiting for that, Nikki, I actually do have one of my own, and since I helped set up the webinar, I want to take the advantage that I have. When you were talking about the life cycles of ticks, you mentioned that they take the blood meal, and that's whenever the vectors could be passed to a human. What about from adults to eggs? Can vectors pass, like Lyme disease or something like that, pass from adult to the egg during that process?
That's it's a really good question, Marshall. So it depends on the pathogen. So most of the pathogens that we're aware of, they will pick it up from some sort of reservoir. So in the case of Lyme disease, the white-footed mouse is considered the primary reservoir for Lyme disease. With Lyme disease, they do not pass it on what's called transovarial transmission, so the adults pass it on to their eggs. I think there is one pathogen where that can occur, and for the life of me, I can't think of which one that is right now. But for the most part, the ones that we come across most frequently are picking it up from some sort of reservoir.
Okay, cool. So we're starting to get some questions in. Nikki, what is the best month to make your first application in the state of Wisconsin?
Oh, in Wisconsin, yeah. So if we're in Wisconsin, I'm going to guess that it might be mostly black-legged ticks that they're thinking about. I mean, it could be American dog tick, and I know the Lone Star tick is also increasing its range. I think in the southern part of Wisconsin, they're already starting to see the Lone Star ticks. So again, depends on the target tick. So if it's the black-legged ticks, Ohio and Wisconsin are going to be too terribly different. So if it's in the right habitat for ticks and they're getting activity in January, February, or March, there could be enough reason there to do an application. Maybe in March. If there's vegetation to treat, leaf litter to treat, because if it's a mild winter, you could see adult activity. I would say most folks are their program is going to target the nymphal stage, and it's going to be around, springtime applications. Typically early May is when you want to be getting the treatment out. So you're getting the treatment out before the nymphs even peak. So May through June is typically when we would be getting those treatments out from most of the Midwest, upper Midwest, as well as the Northeast.
So what are your thoughts about using granulars for ticks along with Demand CS?
Yeah, so good question there too, and I didn't really incorporate that into this presentation. So granular applications certainly have a great fit in this as well, and the big advantage with a granular application is going to be in those hard to reach areas. So you can use a spreader to getting out into deep, dense vegetation areas where you might not be reaching with your power spray or your backpack mist blower. And you can also enhance your application by doing a granular application in that transition zone. Pardon me, but you saw in the results that we had with just the Demand CS application that it was still extremely effective. I see Demand CS just as that additional layer to give you enhanced control and to fill in the gaps where you might not be able to put your liquid out.
So can you use Demand CS for both ticks and mosquitoes?
Absolutely. So both labeled for ticks and mosquitoes. There are going to be some slight differences in your initial inspection, as well as how you approach the control of those two target pests. But the product itself can be used for both of those, as well as highly effective. And we have a secure choice program for mosquitoes as well. When it comes to mosquitoes, we also need to target the larval stage. So we're going to make sure we remove any containers holding water, include an insect growth regulator into areas that are holding water that we can't physically remove. With mosquitoes, we're typically treating 10 feet and below. With ticks, we're typically treating just 3 feet and below. But yeah, you can use Demand for both of those. And I would just say that with the Secure Choice mosquito program, depending if you're going out 30 days or 60 days, we also make the recommendation of tank mixing Demand CS with the insect growth regulator Archer.
Very good. So I have a call back to the Wisconsin question. So would Western Pennsylvania follow the same kind of treatment time periods, I should say?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, and each year could be different. So another thing to keep in mind is ticks can be really affected by how moist or how dry the season goes. Ticks just hate dry years. So if it's moist, if there's more rain, you're probably going to have a whole lot more tick activity. If it's really dry, you might have just some higher natural mortality, and you might not see as many ticks. So it can vary just from year to year.
So on the steel backpack mister, you mentioned using a high setting. So what do you mean by high? 3?
Sure, yeah.
To like 1.8 or 2?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that one up. A good one to clarify. So in this study that we conducted, we were using a steel model, and most of those, they go from a meter setting to 1 to 6. We use full throttle, and then for the tick study, we were actually using the highest setting possible, which was number 6, and that allowed us to get really good penetration and volume through dense vegetation. And that was what was really key. We needed to, because we're targeting leaf litter on the ground. That's a good place for ticks to be hanging out where they can lay their eggs, as well as the vegetation that they can be using for questing. When it comes to mosquitoes, sometimes we crank that down a little bit, where the average is maybe a setting number 3, but can also go all the way up to 6. So, it just depends as you're walking around and how dense the vegetation is. I probably would not go any lower than the setting number 3. And again, that setting number 6 just gets really good penetration and is going to get that product a little bit further into that dense wooded area.
So I think I'm going to just do one more, Nikki. Do you have any suggestions for doing indoor treatments for ticks?
For indoor treatments with ticks, I'm going to guess they're primarily talking about rhipicephalus with the brown dog tick. So what's going to be really important there too is also treating the dogs. The dogs are going to be the main food source for the tick. So make sure you're using an appropriate labeled product for the dogs. Talk to the vet. Just be aware that there is some documented resistance to some of the active ingredients on the products that are labeled for tick control on dogs. Maybe talk to your vet to see what's the newest one on the market, what's getting the best results, and then the cracks and crevices and places where the ticks are then going to try and drop off and hide to molt is where we can target as the pest control industry, and we can incorporate something like Demand CS. We can incorporate an insect growth regulator with that as well. So sanitation of the area, as well as incorporating something like Demand CS into those cracks and crevices. But yeah, the dogs are going to be really key, that they have a role to play, that they have to have appropriate tick products as well.
Yeah, they confirmed they were asking about dog ticks, so that was spot on, Nikki. So Nikki, personally, thank you for everything. They're super informative. For all the attendees, thank you for your time in attending. If you keep an eye out on your email, you'll see more of these in the future. So that's a tease, I guess, going forward. So everybody else, have a great rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you next time.